Big news of the night. Tom Thibodeau is out as president and head coach of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Ryan Saunders named the interim head coach. Welcome to Game Time. Chris Miles here with Mike Patello and Dennis Scott. Guys, this team seems to be headed in the right direction. Are you surprised that they're moving on from Tom Thibodeau right now?
I am shocked. When the news first came out, you look at the standings, they're 2 games out of the 8th spot, the last playoff spot. They're 5-3 in their last 8 games. Their 2 young stars seem to be coming alive, in particular, Karl-Anthony Towns, who for 6-7 straight games has been spectacular. Today, Towns, along with Wiggins, both have 28 points in their victory. So the question is, why and why now?
The timing a little bit, Chris, but there has been a lot of issues with this team the last year and a half, so not a surprise. Now we have to find out a little bit more, and then we'll figure out how they get better from here on out.
To try to figure out what's happening, John Krasinski from The Athletic, he's a guy that has a lot of insight.
Got the sense that this was sort of building over the last days and really weeks, and really even dating back to the whole Jimmy Butler fiasco. I mean, when that thing went down, that was a huge hit to Tom Thibodeau's influence and power and responsibility here. And I think that was certainly what opened the door toward this move. And what Glenn Taylor said at that time was he wanted to evaluate how the team did after the trade. What he told me tonight was that he didn't think they were making enough progress. And so he made the move. Yeah, is it surprising that it happened after a 22-point win against the Lakers? Yes, but I do think that everyone knew Tom Thibodeau's seat was hot, and it was just, you were just wondering what straw was going to break the camel's back here.
Now, was there a line drawn in the sand between Karl-Anthony Towns and Tibbs?
This wasn't a power struggle that Karl-Anthony Towns won by any stretch of the imagination. I do think Tom had some difficulties in terms of his relationship with owner Glenn Taylor, with several others in the organization. I think some players in the locker room were a little frustrated at times with the lack of communication from Tom Thibodeau, but ultimately, I don't think this was one of those many cases that we've seen across the league where a star player doesn't like the coach and orchestrates his firing.
Look, Tibbs is known to be a disciplinarian. Hard practices, short bench, playing guys a lot of minutes, wear and tear on their bodies. We've seen Derrick Rose and Jimmy Butler, guys like that, have injuries throughout their career. Is his style of coaching on the way out?
I think you have to define a couple things. First, coaching, what style of coaching are you talking about? And then you have to define the person himself, because I put a quick list together of guys who I think their practices are probably pretty close to what Thibodeau runs. And I'll go with, how about Michael Malone in Denver, Popovich in San Antonio, Eric Spoelstra in Miami, Budenholzer now in Milwaukee, Brett Brown in Philly, Dwayne Casey in Detroit, Billy Donovan in Oklahoma City, Quinn Snyder in Utah. These are all guys who have disciplined, organized, hard practices, but the person is different. And how Thibs comes across may be different on how these guys come across. But the structure of their practices, what they're trying to get across, their philosophy of do you practice or don't you practice, that's what differentiates between different people.
No, I agree with you, Coach. I throw in Kenny Atkinson now in Brooklyn, the way he's turning around the culture and making guys practice longer, pay attention to detail. Let's just call it what it is. Now it's up for Towns and Wiggs to really step their games up. You talk about Malone in Denver, that young team with Jokic and all those guys. 2 years ago, they weren't playing defense. Now they're playing defense. So to Coach's point, Chris, maybe Tibbs' message is not being delivered. Maybe it's to your point, your question of his style. He's never been one of those coaches that's very vocal, where some of these coaches are, like Quinn Snyder in Utah. All the players talk about Quinn Snyder's door always being open, and you've been able to go in and talk about, Coach, my playing time. Now, Quinn may say, you're not playing right now, but that's the communication some players like to have, maybe Tibbs not being that transparent.
Let me say this. Tibbs probably would be better with a veteran team.
Right.
A bunch of veteran guys who've been around to understand this is what we have to do to win. But he didn't have a veteran team. So he's piecing together these young guys mixed with some old guys. And let's not take away any responsibility that should be on the players as well. It's not just Tibbs, okay? It's both sides. And that's where the meeting has to come between staff, roster, You both have to be on the same page in how you move forward. And a lot of times it's how you say it. We can say the same things, but say it differently, and it's interpreted differently.
And that's why with a young team, if you don't have that communication on the right level, that's how you lose teams and you lose some of your star players. So right now, you see to your point, Cat and Wiggs are playing better basketball, so that's why a lot of people are shocked at the timing, but understand this team has had some issues.
Certainly, Fred Hoiberg also mentioned as a possible candidate for that head coaching position or front office position, something we have to monitor going forward. Andrew Wiggins, you see that? Punched them in the mouth early. And Wiggins, he's not really looking at that, but it seemed like he did. He came out like the Andrew Wiggins we've been expecting to see for a long time, 3D.
Yeah, we know the talent's there. We know the athletic ability is there. When do you take that mindset, well, I want to be the best player on the court certain nights?
There was that dunk, and then there was this one.
Oh, my goodness. That's the athletic ability I'm talking about.
25 points at the half for Wiggins, 28 in the game. Second, third, fourth quarters, they belong to this guy. JaVale McGee have some from Karl Anthony Towns.
Yeah, that's a cat poster right there.
They call him Towns, maybe go city, state, country.
Ooh, let's
He's
call him
everything
block
on this
block.
block.
Well, this guy's been on a roll now for the last, 6, 7 games?
Right.
Then there's the effort play. There's a beautiful play, and then there's the effort on the offensive glass. Not just this play, 3D, this one as well.
If there's anything that frustrates a coach, it's to see a player who is gifted, who has been blessed with incredible talent, that doesn't utilize that talent and max it out. And that comes from the heart. It comes from the extra effort. We saw examples of those plays right there.
Andrew Wiggins, Karl Anthony Towns, both with 28 points. Towns with those 18 rebounds. And look at what he's done in his last 7 games. He has 6 consecutive games of at least 28 points. He's averaging 28 points over those last 7 games and 17 rebounds. Just a monster stat line over the past couple of weeks for Karl Anthony Towns. And we get to see him on Tuesday on Players Only. 3D, how do we say it?
Players only, baby.
It's a doubleheader. The 2-time defending champs hosting the New York Knicks. I'm sure 3D cooks
Bay
up something good for
Area.
that. The Raptors once again flex their muscles against one of the other top teams in the East. We the North, we hear you. And the Wizards, they did something they haven't done in over a month. That's up next on Game Time. Griff, stop me if you've heard this before. Jimmy Butler not happy about his situation. Why is this different than any other time we've heard this from Jimmy Butler?
Well, if you've just suspend the fact that it's Jimmy Butler, you don't think about what's happened to him historically in the past to get to this point. This specific episode is not that unique. This happens often. Players will challenge coaches in meetings during film, etc. It just doesn't get out. To me, what's significant about this issue is not that it's Jimmy saying he's uncomfortable with the offense, because I would bet Jimmy's had conversations with Brett Brown where he's shared these thoughts privately as well. He's probably told Brett when he came over, look, I run hot. This is how I work. I'm really competitive. I'm going to burst out once in a while. Come back at me the same way, because I know he wants you to push back just as hard. What's meaningful to me is it got out. And that, to me, is representative of the fact that there's been some discord there already. They've already had issues with the fit of Joel and Ben Simmons a little bit. They've had issues along the way where people aren't necessarily happy with the fit and role. And when you're 25 and 14 and you're playing as well as they're playing, it's unusual to have that level of discontent.
I agree with you. I'm a little bit worried that it got out. But we've seen the situation before with Jimmy. Some stuff has got out. My biggest thing that worries me, though, is this is Jimmy's third stop. Normally in baseball, they say 3 strikes and you're out. And he's had problems, whether it be with young players, coaches, other star players, at every single stop. There was rumors that him and Derrick Rose had a little bit of a riff. Same thing with him and Karl Anthony Towns and Wiggins. Now we see this here with the coaching staff. We see the situation with him and Embiid a little bit. Seems like they're going back and forth. I just see a lot of smoke. And for somebody that is going to be up for a maximum extension, you would think that Jimmy Butler would be on his best behavior. if I'm some of the other teams in the league and I'm thinking about throwing max dollars at this guy, that has to be a red flag. I have to start to consider maybe this isn't the guy. Maybe I go after somebody that's less talented but more tolerable in my locker room, because money just makes you more of what you already are. This guy has been here 6 weeks, and he's already cutting up, talking about he needs the ball, challenging the coaching staff. What do you do, and what do you think is going to happen if you give him $200 million? He might cut a slam full.
No, and I think that's true, and certainly because it's Jimmy, you do take into account the history. But I do think it's incredibly common for these conversations to take place and for players to be uncomfortable with their role, particularly when the fit of the pieces is as wonky as it is in Philly. Everybody wants things to be a little different. You remember earlier, Joel was not happy that he was playing so far away from the rim, and the reason they were doing that was a la Brook Lopez, they were trying to open the floor for Ben. So there's already those seeds of discontent. So what Jimmy then ends up doing is he makes the situation seem much worse. But I think there have been several times in the league where you thought it was a brush fire and there wasn't even smoke. And if it wasn't Jimmy Butler, I don't think this is even a story. But because it's Jimmy, that's the story. And to me, the story is it got out and they're unhappy winning this much.
I don't know. It just doesn't sit right with me, because he had the problem with Karl Anthony Towns in Minnesota and who was the guy. And now we see the situation here. I can't be used like, whoa, 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 whoa. When you're not the guy, you have to figure out how to play with the guy. It's the same thing that we experienced in Cleveland. Kevin Love was not happy with his role. He didn't challenge Blatt. He didn't challenge T. Lue. He eventually figured out how to play with LeBron James because he was not the best player on that team. I don't know if Jimmy Butler has gotten that memo that Embiid is the best player on that team. And that worries me, once again, if I'm another team or if I'm a GM thinking about throwing this guy money. Like, if you're the Lakers and you're going after Jimmy Butler, is he going to get in line with LeBron James dominating the ball out here? Like, these are all the questions that you have to ask yourself when you bring Jimmy Butler in here. He is costing himself money by the day.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with the costing himself money thing. If it gets out that Philadelphia does not offer him max, it will be a very bad sign. And other teams around the league will wonder what's wrong. And they will agree, well, this is a problem for Jimmy. But if Philly is going after him full bore and they're offering him max, I think that will be something that teams sort of mitigate. And Kevin Love, you're right. He wasn't initially comfortable with his role, and it took him a long time to find peace with what was being asked of him. He was still voicing it. It's just that he had a different style of doing that. He approached it differently. You have to know that Jimmy's going to be a guy who's going to be all fire and come at you direct all the time. That's who he is. So, again, if he had not had the issues he'd had, I don't even care that he's uncomfortable where he's at right now. It's fine. But to your point, because he's done it so many times, he could potentially cost himself money if he doesn't eventually assimilate and be somebody who helps them win basketball games.
I just think that one of my favorite boxers is Miguel Cotto, and he had a line when he was talking to another fighter. He said, in every fight I was in, I've always known what side I was, whether I was the A side or the B side. I don't think Jimmy Butler realizes sometimes what side he's on. He's the B side. He's acting like he's the A side. You can't come in here talking about, hey, I want to be used this way and I want this, that, and the third. This is Joel Embiid's team. You need to do things in a more diplomatic type of way. You need to talk to Joel. You need to figure out how we're going to play together. But you have to understand, everything runs through the big fella. And I don't think that Jimmy Butler is all the way on board with that.
So, Brendan, we've fully explored Jimmy Butler's side of this, but you see the Brett Brown quote on the screen. I didn't think it went over the line. If it did, I would have addressed it.
He has to say that, though.
So for Brett Brown going forward, the rest of the guys on the team, whether it's Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons, the other people he has to deal with, is this something that may hamper his job going forward if Jimmy Butler is able to speak out in this way and there's not repercussions?
No question. We don't know if it went over the line or if it didn't. But here, let's just say for devil's advocate, it went over the line. He's officially just lost that locker room because now no one respects him. If it went over the line and people think it went over the line and then he comes out and covers and says, oh, no, it didn't go over the line, it's okay, and he doesn't check Jimmy, now people think you're soft. And now what happens, the ripple effect is when Brett Brown wants to yell at Landry Shamet, he's going to be looking up there like, you don't talk to Jimmy like that. Don't come at me all hard. Don't with all that fire. And coaches slowly but surely the trust erodes away, and people just start looking at you like, yeah, whatever. And that's what happens. And that's part of this as well. Jimmy has to understand when he does this, it's not just about Jimmy. That's part of the problem. I think he's living in a Jimmy world, and he's only thinking about Jimmy Butler. He's like the NBA's version of Antonio Brown.
We talked about this when they brought him in. They were absolutely increasing both their ability to be really good out of timeout late and design some things that opponents can't deal with. And they were also really increasing their volatility. And Jimmy brings that 100%. There's no question because of how hot he runs. I look at this, though, and I think a team that's this good, they're 25-14 overall. They're playing at a very high level in general terms since Jimmy got there. When you come into the season with the expectations they had, and the only thing that's going to spell success for you is making it to a finals or at least an Eastern Conference Finals, you're either all the way with me or you're all the way against me. So where this becomes interesting is come trade deadline, if they've got people in that room that are against them, they need to act on it because that's the one thing that unequivocally derails a season. This kind of thing is adversity, which is opportunity. You galvanize from this or you get radically worse, but at least it reveals something to you. Where this becomes actually meaningful, and I liked his quote saying what he said, but when this becomes actually meaningful is, A, if you're right about losing the locker room, which certainly I don't think you can say he's done to this point, but if they're not all the way on board with what's being asked of them as a team, then Elton Brand's going to have to start to jettison some of those pieces who aren't. And that's when this becomes intriguing to me.
Well, that's the problem. I think the pieces that you're talking about is Jimmy Butler.
Wow, and they just acquired him, 21 games ago.
It was all good just a week ago.
Mavericks, one of those games, one of 8 games tonight. Also, the Raptors-Bucks, this game we're waiting for, 8:30 right here on NBA TV. That guy, Nikola Jokic, had himself a game. Highlights coming your way.